فالصبر عودته منهما الجنة يريد عينيه رواه البخاري. So he said that indeed Allah the Mighty and Majestic said, when I test my servant with his two beloveds, and that's a reference to the eyes, to the vision. When I test my servant with respect to his two beloveds, meaning the two eyes, then I will give for him in exchange for that paradise. Paradise. So this hadith is reported by Al-Bukhari. And once again, as we mentioned before, that An-Nawawi rahimahullah, after mentioning the foundations of the subject at the beginning through ayat from the Quran and through key ahadith explaining the principles of, in this case, patience, sabr. How do we understand sabr? He then brings a hadith which indicate the practical examples or ways in which this quality of sabr is shown. So we've seen many examples in the hadith which have preceded. And so in this hadith, we see that it relates to one of the bounties and the favors, the faculties that Allah Azza wa Jal has bestowed upon mankind. And so Shaykh Uthaymeen, rahimahullah, he says that in this hadith, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he informed, and this is a hadith Qudsi, because he's narrating from his Lord, Tabarak wa Ta'ala. And so he said, إِذَا ابْتَلَيْتُ عَبْدِي بِحَبِيبَتَيْهِ. And this means his two eyes. So meaning that when I test my servant with blindness, when he loses his sight and he becomes blind, he cannot see. And then he shows patience upon that, except that I give him in exchange for that paradise. And Shaykh goes on to say that the eye, naturally, the vision, the eye is beloved to a person. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes that away from him, and he is patient and he anticipates his reward. So here there is ihtisab. And this is important because this will comes in numerous texts as well and in the Quran as well, that not only is it patience, so you have sabr, but there's also ihtisab, which is expectation or anticipation of reward. And this increases the overall reward or the benefit to the servant, as opposed to just mere patience in itself. So he says, so if a person has patience, وَصَبْرَ الْإِنسَانِ وَاحْتَسَبْ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ يُعَوِّدُهُ بِهِمَ الْجَنَّةِ. Allah will exchange that for him by way of paradise. And as you know, paradise, it equals more than the world, because the Prophet ﷺ, he said, لَمَوْضِعُ صَوْتِ أَحَدِكُمْ فِي الْجَنَّةِ خَيْرٌ مِنَ الدُّنْيَا وَمَا عَلِيهَا. He said that the place of the whip of one of you, right? So roughly like a space of a meter, for example. In paradise, so the space of the whip of one of you in paradise is better than the world and whatever is upon it. So the Shaykh goes on to say that the amount of a meter, imagine it's like a meter squared, for example, of the world, of paradise, is better than the world and whatever is in it. And this is because what is in paradise is eternal. It will never perish. It will remain forever. And as for that which is upon the world, then it will perish, it will end, it will cease. And that's why this small amount of space in paradise is equal to the whole world or better than it. The Shaykh goes on to say, and mentions a point, that when Allah Azza wa Jal, he takes from a person one of his senses, in this case the vision, then Allah Azza wa Jal, he compensates for that by way of the other senses. And meaning that the other senses become heightened or strengthened or improved through the loss of that one sense. And so even though he might have lost that one, then the increase in, let's say, the sensitivity or the, of the others, this is a compensation for him as well. Sheikh goes on to give an example that a blind person, uh, Allah Azza wa Jal, He favors him with the strengthening of the other senses, al-ihsas wal-idrak, meaning that his sense of perception increases even though he doesn't have his vision. He says, for example, if you find someone who's blind and you find him in the market, you find he's walking, it's as if he knows exactly where he's going. So he knows he's going to walk a certain amount of steps, then he will be here, and then he needs to turn left, for example, and such is here, and then he'll walk that way. Like, even though he hasn't got his vision, he can just sense where he is in the absence of his vision. And that's because the other senses or the general awareness that, it becomes strengthened with the loss of one of the senses. So for example, when he walks, the Sheikh says that he will know that there's a turn here, and that there's a slope here, and there's a slope downwards, and there's an incline here. And even to the extent that a person who's blind might enter into a taxi, for example, and he will tell that person, give him the directions, which might be on the other side of town, and he will say, take the right here, and take here, and take here, and take him all the way up until he gets to the actual place that he needs to get to. So this is something that's experienced as well, and in fact we find it from the scholars of the Muslims, that when you lose your vision, your hearing becomes improved, right? And your ability to reflect and understand and grasp what is being said or what is being read to you, this becomes greatly improved, because the vision, like the vision can be considered to be a kind of interference, if you like, to what is heard, right? So when you listen to something, then you have the visual aspect, you are distracted, you are seeing things. But if your vision is taken away and you are forced only just to reflect upon the words and what you are hearing, and your mind now, instead of processing the visual aspect, it's focusing purely on what is heard, and reflecting and grasping and understand what is heard. And so this gives a greater amount of comprehension. So that's why you see that from the great scholars of this time, and maybe in the past as well, are those who lost their vision. From them is Sheikh Abdul Aziz bin Baz, rahimahullah, who is considered to be an imam of the Sunnah, imam of Ahl Sunnah in this era. And likewise Sheikh Ubaid al-Jabiri, rahimahullah. So the point being that just because Allah Azza wa Jal takes away your vision, and you show patience, and not only do you get the reward of patience and the anticipation of reward, but also in this dunya, Allah gives you like compensation in the sense that your other senses are improved and you are given blessing in the other senses as well. Now, in this hadith, this is an example of obviously vision, but the same can apply. Like, you might lose your hearing, you might lose a limb, like a hand or a leg, right? So anyone who has patience in this hadith, it is obviously the vision, because the vision is one of the most beloved things to a person. But in principle, from the hadith in general, a person who's put to trial by losing any of his faculties, and he has patience, then Allah Azza wa Jal will grant him paradise, in this case in respect to the eyes specifically. Hadith number 35 is a hadith of